Meet the Inchworm Bandits.
These thieves think they're clever.
This looks like an action movie.
But there's one thing they forgot.
They made a serious miscalculation about where the surveillance camera was pointing.
And later, a disturbing holiday crime.
It's awful. A family pet was snatched from outside of a deli.
There are rings that operate to steal certain kinds of dogs.
But neighbors band together to find him.
The social media reaction goes around like a wildfire.
I really didn't think I'd see him again.
Houston police still need your help to find a gang of criminals who may be responsible for more than a dozen burglaries.
Thieves targeting 2 other businesses in this area. They broke in through this window.
November 19th, 2018. The Timberwood area of Houston, Texas. 3 a.m. A brazen burglary is underway at a pizza restaurant.
They started smashing the glass with a crowbar. Then they climbed in.
This is breaking and entering 101.
That they've got their hoods up, they're wearing gloves, they're covered in head to toe, just trying to keep their identities concealed.
And these burglars have a unique technique. Get down low, crawl, then roll.
So we have motion detectors, and they're part of the alarm. And that's probably why they were rolling around in the restaurant.
This looks like an action movie.
Like there's a laser beam that's going to touch them and the alarm's going to go off and the bars are going to shut down on top of them if they trigger the alarm.
They could also be, afraid of other like infrared cameras seeing them.
The thieves have either forgotten or maybe they just don't care, but the cameras are recording their every move.
And they head straight for the safe.
They knew directly where to go and how to get there. These guys were very prepared.
If they know someone's not in the area and it's worth the risk for them, they're gonna take it.
And with an assortment of tools ready, they immediately get to work.
They look around and they ransack. They're looking for anything that's of value. They smashed the safe with a crowbar, sledgehammer, anything they had.
These thieves cannot pry the safe open. They're beating the heck out of it, trying to get inside. And then at one point, we see one of them pull out their cell phone. They seem to be calling for help.
After about 30 minutes, they finally give up.
So even though they weren't able to open up the safe and get the money that they were looking for, they didn't want to leave empty-handed.
They did take my boombox, my drill, and my flashlight.
Their most baffling haul? Some children's toys.
A bunch of stuffed animals and things from the game room.
Then, crawling out the same way they came in, the thieves disappear into the night. Jesse learns about the theft when he arrives to open up a few hours later.
When we got to the store, we checked the cameras. We noticed they crawled around all over the restaurant to try to find the money.
Thankfully, the $2,000 that was locked in the safe remains untouched, but these bandits have caused another $2,000 in property damage for Jesse.
Well, these burglars, they need to be caught. They're a nuisance. They're a plague.
Angry, Jesse takes the video from the cameras he installed only 6 months earlier to the local news.
3 thieves rolling across the floor of a Mr. Gatti's restaurant at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, they came over here with a crowbar and they sat there and smashed it about 20 times. These guys watch too much TV, too many movies.
The crooks are mocked for not thinking about the security cameras.
They made a serious miscalculation about where the surveillance camera was pointing.
And they get a catchy name.
Meet the Inchworm Bandits. Huh.
The Inchworm Bandits.
The staff is actually taken to calling them the Inchworm Bandits.
It really just nods back to the fact of the movements that they were doing across the restaurant to try to keep low and do this really quietly. And it's also a catchy name.
Both police and the media soon realized that the same Inchworm crew is caught on multiple surveillance cameras, committing multiple burglaries.
It's just a style that seems to be happening all the time now. There's an audible alarm. They'll back away. They'll wait a little while, see if the police show up right away. If not, they start with crawling on the ground as slowly as possible.
I mean, they're inchworming their way across my dining room floor.
They like to hit the same type of establishments.
All these businesses are set up the exact same, so they know exactly where to go. Typically, it's like the manager's office or the cashier, the cash machines, the registers behind the counters.
And whoever they are, they're extremely well organized.
They'll have lookouts. You'll see a cell phone lit up or on speaker. They're getting intel from outside. And so they know exactly how much time they have.
Jesse pleads with the band of bandits to stay away from small business owners.
I don't know. These guys need to get a life. They need something to do. Leave us alone. Get a job. Get to work. Everybody else in the area works hard. Why can't they?
And he hopes the public mocking will stop them.
They'll be too embarrassed to come out again.
But these thieves have other plans.
Wait for it. Jesse gets hit again. The bandits return, and this time,
they grind the safe open.
Incredibly, 1 year after brazen robbers hit Jesse's restaurant, they come back to steal from him again.
You know, there's so much work out there, but these guys, they feel it's easier to just go out and rob from people like me. They bring in bigger tools.
They came prepared. They even had a grinder to cut open the safe.
They bring these power tools that are battery operated that will cut just as fast as anything else. They bring extra blades. They bring extra power tools, extra batteries, because they know how long it takes typically to get into these safes.
This time, they managed to get away with $3,000 cash.
Some of it was tips for servers. I know for certain it was the same guys. It was the same Inchworm bandits that did it.
Jesse is stunned that the bold bandits had the nerve to hit him again.
We have motion sensors. We have glass breaks. We have a 24-hour monitoring, but the alarm system didn't work. You pay for a sense of protection, and these guys, they violated it.
The robbers continue to hit one restaurant after another, and they're especially fond of fast food chains.
Popeyes, chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Church's, Taco Bell's, Pizza Hut. Anywhere where they know where those safes are at, they're hitting those locations.
I think it's highly organized. These guys are probably a crew of 15 of them that do it.
Police say the Inchworm bandits have likely committed hundreds of robberies.
Thieves are targeting their pizza shops and neighboring businesses.
Thieves took nearly $6,000 from the 3 pizzerias.
And they believe it's part of a coordinated gang effort, where they'll just take the safe if they can't crack it.
These crews are coming from a lot of gangs. Some of these gangs are working together where typically they wouldn't. They want to go make some money.
The one thing that unites all gangs, money. And cash will make you do some strange things, like doing the Inchworm at 3 a.m. at a pizza parlor with your boys.
A lot of those restaurants, they typically don't do the money drop. They have the safes there that they drop the money into. The accessibility to the cash is there, so that's what they're looking to get. Just if it's $5,000, $3,000, $2,000, that's a good score for them.
I'm pretty upset about it. I wish these guys would get caught.
The video caught on Jesse's security cameras from the first burglary captures what appears to be a getaway car, a silver SUV. But police don't have much else to go on.
So unfortunately, we're often left with really grainy video. And this is a burglar's best friend.
A lot of the videos are poor quality. Without some type of evidence left behind, cell phone, fingerprint, DNA evidence, it's very difficult to identify these suspects.
Even though there was a lot of talk online about these Inchworm bandits being stupid or not just being the brightest criminals, at the end of the day, I think they actually did a pretty good job at their trade craft. That they take pretty great care in protecting their identities with wearing gloves, making sure they have baggy clothes on, keeping their hoods up and things like that. And also just hitting like local family businesses, knowing that these places probably don't have the money to equip some of this high-tech security.
This looks like nonsense, but it keeps on working.
These bandits seem to be fearless.
And unfortunately, because it's a nonviolent crime, the reality is those suspects aren't going to stay in jail or go to prison very long. There's consequences, but they're just not afraid of them.
These criminals may be getting away with it, but I'm not impressed until they start doing flips.
There's definitely an element to this where, you know, once you start to build up your confidence with committing a crime like this over and over, you definitely start to think that you're untouchable.
Some business owners are responding by putting their cash elsewhere.
We've had a lot of business start to leave their registers open and their registers on top of the counter, kind of to signify, hey, look, there's nothing in here.
The restaurants might as well hang a big sign in the window that says, "We take all our money home at night."
As for Jesse, he's decided the best solution is to look at the bright side of things. He and his staff now use that video of the inchworm bandits rolling across the restaurant floor as a source of endless entertainment.
We look back at it, we laugh. You know, getting only hit twice in the grand scheme of things isn't too bad.
These inchworm bandits, they're going to mess up, and we're going to be there and catch them when we can. We're always going to be looking for them.
In New York, another bold theft is also caught on camera. December 27th, 2020, New York City. It's the holiday season, and Columbia University professor Victoria De Grazia is enjoying some time with her beloved dog, Luca.
Luca's 7 years old. He's a long-haired dachshund. He now reaches maturity. He's quite calm. He's very sweet.
On this afternoon, Victoria isn't feeling well.
I was resting because I had a cold.
So her partner takes Luca for his walk. He stops at a deli and ties Luca to the outdoor fruit stand, something Victoria has done countless times before.
Sort of like a controlled situation. I usually would put him completely under the fruit stand so he wasn't even visible, you know, to passers-by when I would take him out, and then never for more than 5 minutes.
In New York City, it's not uncommon to see dogs just tied up with their leash right outside of a store.
In this country, health and safety laws usually prohibit dog owners from bringing their dogs into restaurants or stores. Most of the time, nothing bad happens.
But this time, that's not the case.
When the boyfriend comes outside, the dog is gone. Luca wasn't left outside for hours. He was only outside for a matter of minutes.
Victoria's partner runs back into the store to ask for help. They call the police, who arrive within minutes.
Thankfully, the store had video.
And what's on the video shocks everyone.
The first thing that we see in this video is the dog is sitting under a produce section, waiting for his owner to come back.
And we see the suspect pet the dog, not really doing anything that to a passerby may seem out of the ordinary.
And the dog's accepting this man.
Then the suspect unties the dog's leash, and he flees with the dog.
Police tell them that dog thefts are far more common than people realize.
There are rings that operate to steal certain kinds of dogs. Unfortunately for Luca, the kind of dog he is makes him a target for people who make possibly thousands of dollars in a sale after the theft.
When Victoria's partner tells her what happened, she's devastated.
Came in and he looked ghastly, and he said Luca was stolen. Began to cry, began to think these terrifying feelings, and then what to do. I felt very bad for my partner because it could have been me.
It is very emotional. It's like losing somebody in your own family.
Luca's owner jumps into action to try to get him back.
We made up signs. Have you seen this dog? Please give us information. This is a family dog. Please return the dog as soon as you can. We love Luca.
The response is instant, and soon the whole neighborhood is looking for Luca.
Lots of people helping. Tack, 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 these signs all over. And the police, they also began to distribute flyers. And they put that onto the television.
Awful. A family pet was snatched from outside of a deli on the Upper West Side, and the owners are just devastated. The dog napper is apparently not very shy about the crime.
Why do you think someone would steal a dog?
Tens of thousands of people knew about this.
The story really starts to go viral. The social media reaction goes around like a wildfire. Even the NYPD 24th Precinct shares information about Luca on their Twitter account.
But police also warn Victoria that many stolen dogs are never recovered.
We were courting danger.
The potential for danger and the potential for death is certainly there.
As a whole city seems to fret about who has snatched Luca, tips pour in.
An avalanche of tips came in. Lots of people reported having maybe seen the suspect walking through the neighborhood. The reaction that occurred was incredible. Detectives, they worked into their caseload a tremendous effort to locate Luca.
Then, 3 days after Luca disappears, Victoria gets a surprising call.
From a woman in a little bottega, a little store. She said that Sunday night, the night Luca was stolen, a guy had come into her store with a dog and was trying to sell it to her.
The woman tells Victoria the man's behavior made her suspicious.
She said, I'm not interested, I have a dog. Besides, that dog looks to me like he was stolen. And he ran out. She saw him go into the next store.
The woman suspects that after he left her store and went to another one, the man found someone who was willing to buy the dog.
He went in and he came out with some money.
She's seen the news coverage about Luca and wants to help. So she sends Victoria images from her security camera.
I had looked at the email, and there was the guy with Luca in his arms.
Victoria immediately notifies the police.
They went and questioned the store owner where the dog was reportedly sold.
This store owner confirms that a man who came in that night did sell a dog to one of his customers. He tells police exactly where that person lives, so they head there to find out if the dog is indeed Luca. A few hours later, Victoria gets another call.
I really didn't think I'd see him again. I got a call. We have the dog, and we'll be bringing him home. His fur looked a little spiky. He was still sort of embarrassed looking and went and hid under the bed for several hours. And then the next day he was himself.
Thankfully for Victoria, Luca was recovered safely, and they're able to be a happy family again.
Here he is, his little furry self. Very sweet, yeah, you're sweet, okay. There he is.
Just a few days after he's reunited with Victoria, authorities track down Luca's dog napper. He's charged with grand larceny. The person who he sold Luca to is not charged. And frightening as it all was, now everyone knows Luca as the dog-snatching survivor.
When we walk down the street, people say, "Is that the Luca? Is that the Luca?" You know, he's like a little celebrity.
For Victoria, the ordeal has renewed her faith in mankind.
It was quite an amazing 4 days of people responding and collaborating. It made you believe totally in humankind.
And it's a Christmas she'll never forget.
This truly was a post-Christmas miracle.
We were so heartbroken and we were so happy when he came back. It ended up being a nice Christmas story.
When a good Samaritan tries to do the right thing,
I'm gonna follow the guy.
They were hiding something.
He puts himself in grave danger.
They wanted me for blood. I thought these guys have a gun. I was scared for my life.
I was angry because we're newly engaged.
And later, a brazen crime results in an unbelievable mix-up.
Everybody thought it was him.
It has been freaking everyone out.
And leaves a whole city in shock.
That will make you wonder if what you just saw was indeed real.
Friday, August 9th, 2019, Pomona, California. Nonprofit leader Amos Young is on his way to work and is driving past Freeway 60 on Town Avenue when he sees something suspicious. He decides to make a U-turn to take a closer look.
He observed what appeared to be a group of people unloading something in an area that's known to have problems in the city of Pomona.
It's concerning. I feel like something isn't right.
This area, which is about maybe a quarter-mile long, we're always dealing with the calls for illegal dumping, and it's a never-ending process of maintaining control.
In California, illegal dumping, disposing of garbage, waste, or other matter on public or private property is a crime. So Amos decides to record on his cell phone as 3 men haul items off a truck and through a hole in a chain-link fence.
I didn't know what was inside the containers, but I could smell it wasn't anything good. And that alone brought me to pause for a moment. They seemed like they were hiding something and afraid to be seen.
The men are not happy that Amos stopped to record them. So one of them starts recording him.
He whips out his phone in the same moment, like, I see you and you see me, and I really don't want you here because now I have you on video filming me. And this starts to escalate really quickly.
But he pulled out his phone. My concern was that he was calling in some of his buddies from the neighborhood to come to the spot because of whatever he was hiding.
With his eyes locked on Amos, the man marches right up to his car.
At first, I really thought he was just walking over to have a conversation. But then you realize he wanted to fight.
This is scary. The man is clearly furious that Amos has interrupted his plans.
You can see it in his face. He wants his crime to go as seamlessly as possible. And now Amos is throwing a wrench in that plan.
He gets very, very upset. He comes up, comes after my driver's door, starts punching, kicking, erratically trying to get inside of the car, pulled on my door handle to try to get to me. There was very little that I could do other than be concerned about making sure that I made it home alive.
Shaken, Amos dials 911.
You're in Pomona, right?
Yep. I'm at town just before the 60 freeway. A guy walked up to my car and started banging, kicking my car. Looks like they're doing some illegal dumping as well.
Amos doesn't know who these men are or why one of them is attacking him, but he knows he's in danger.
It's unknown what's inside the vehicle. It's unknown if these suspects are on parole, probation, armed with guns or knives.
If I didn't keep my cool, it could turn violent. It already was a level of violence. So I had to keep my cool.
But his attacker is just getting started.
This guy's coming at me with a cement block. I'm terrified.
Stunned, Amos carefully backs his car away from the scene, all the while continuing to relay every detail to 911.
It's a red SUV Durango.
At that point, I pulled forward to get a better look at the license plate.
It hasn't left yet. Plate is 108R. 108R.
For a split second, Amos thinks this is it. He'll never see his family again.
That rock striking any person could kill them instantly.
I was scared that that cement block was gonna come through the glass and I was gonna die. I was scared for my life. I realized at that point, this guy really is not playing.
They just took a brick to my car.
I can't hold back. I owe too much to those that have come before us to clean up our streets. He tries to get away. So I began following this guy, following the truck, and making sure that police knew every second of where they were headed.
What's your name, sir?
Amos Young. The vehicle is making a right on Marketplace.
I thought to myself, what if police do not arrive on time? And what am I gonna do?
And Amos still doesn't know if the men are armed.
There was a moment where I stopped and thought, these guys have a gun. These guys have a gun.
Amos is risking further harm just by following these men. What if they were leading him to a secluded location where they would hurt him?
Recognizing that I was by myself and being in a city where oftentimes it may take a while for assistance to arrive, I felt all alone.
Then the truck he is chasing suddenly makes a drastic move.
So I'm driving, following. All of a sudden, one door opens, bang, bang, bang. That's what I was expecting at that moment. I thought this guy's gonna come back and he's gonna shoot me. Worst case scenario, all three of these men were gonna get out of that car and come after me. The number one thing was to make sure that they could not get inside of my vehicle.
But instead of coming after him, the man bolts out of sight.
The suspect got out, and the other guys that were in the vehicle continued on. So the suspect looks like he's going to be running westbound back towards Town Avenue.
Drew, where are you? Where is the suspect? Was it parked? What does the person look like?
Where is he running? And where are the other two men in the truck headed now?
Where's the driver?
The driver took off.
They could have kicked him out as a way to say, we don't want to go down with you. Or he could have jumped out on his own and said, let me run because I don't want to get caught.
The two men in the truck drive off, so Amos focuses his attention on the man on foot, the one who tried to kill him.
He is now running westbound, Town and the 60, correct?
Yes. I'm going to follow the guy who actually hit my car and not the suspect vehicle.
That's the guy I gotta go after. I let the car go. My number one concern was stopping the attacker from attacking someone else. At this moment, I'm seeing this guy run, jump, climb over walls, about to access the freeway, and I'm like, this is gonna be bad. This guy's gonna get away.
The suspect was able to disappear, and he no longer had a visual on him.
With his attacker out of sight, Amos pulls into a nearby parking lot to wait for the police. After he shows them his video of the attack, it doesn't take them long to figure out who is behind it.
Within hours, they fingerprinted my entire car, had enough prints to match whom they believed it was.
The man, 26-year-old Jacob McQuana, has an active warrant for felony vandalism.
My attacker was known to police. Police, along with others in the community, worked day and night to find him.
Our undercover task force officers were relentless to solve the crime.
The video Amos took is posted on social media and quickly goes viral. Most people applaud him, but a few warn him that he should have minded his own business.
I'm being told by people, you're a snitch, you're this, you're that. You can't be doing that. That's dangerous.
The ordeal leaves Amos and his family on edge.
I was concerned every single day I brought in family and friends to walk with me, go to the barber shop with me, to go out with me and eat, because I still had to live. And I wasn't gonna let this one attack keep me from enjoying the beauty of my community that I do love.
He actually became a little more attached. Everywhere I went, he wanted to go. And everywhere we went, his eyes are on everything and everybody more than usual. When I saw the video, there were a lot of emotions going on. I felt anger. I was angry at Amos first. Because to me, we're newly engaged. We plan to have a family together. So I'm thinking, come home. Like, don't put yourself in the position to be hurt and not come home to your family. But then the emotions of being proud flooded in. I'm very proud, yet still edgy. Because he has such a big heart, and I don't want his heart to get in the way of his safety.
But Amos is determined to keep speaking out about the incident.
I and so many others will not allow our community to be degraded by any criminal.
Amos wanted to make a difference. He risked his vehicle, he risked his life to stop dumping in the city of Pomona. Everybody wants to clean up their communities. They want to make them safer.
And on August 21st, after almost 2 weeks of hiding from the police, Jacob Makwana turns himself in.
In the end, the pressure just became too much, where he couldn't escape anymore.
Makwana is charged with assault with a deadly weapon, felony vandalism, and throwing an object at a moving vehicle with intent to cause great bodily injury.
He was sentenced to 1 year in state prison. He served half time and was released early.
While Amos is uneasy knowing his attacker is back on the streets, he knows he did the right thing.
We need to stop senseless attacks like this from taking place. The buck stops here. It's about being a good neighbor.
In Ohio, a woman decides to be a good neighbor by turning in her own boyfriend.
Tonight, we actually show you a stunning local case that will make you scratch your head a little bit and wonder if what you just saw was indeed real.
March 2010, Cincinnati, Ohio. The Hamilton County Sheriff's Office responds to a bank robbery. And this isn't an isolated incident.
The Cincinnati area had experienced a series of bank robberies. The first string occurred in March and April of 2010.
Whoever is behind them, this robber isn't getting away with much.
Probably less than $15,000 out of all of the robberies. It wasn't a whole lot. I mean, they don't keep that much cash around for this reason.
But the rash of robberies leaves employees terrified.
You got a guy who's threatening you, saying he's got a gun.
On the other side of the counter, on the other side of the glass, those tellers don't know what the robber is capable of, what his intention is. That kind of thing can cause quite a bit of fear and anxiety. All they want to do is just do their job and go home. They don't want to get injured or killed just because somebody decides they're going to rob the bank.
As they try to figure out who is responsible for the robberies, police are only sure of one thing. This is almost certainly the same guy.
They all have one thing in common: the same suspect. He looks exactly the same in every single video. It's a black guy wearing a hood, sunglasses, and he's here to rob the place.
In hopes of identifying him, police released the security videos to the local news.
Police released these photos of the suspect.
They put his photo all over the media. It was all over the news.
He held up multiple tri-state banks, and the surveillance video hit probably every newscast in Cincinnati.
Crime Stoppers is a tip hotline with these pictures. They got many, many calls.
Tipsters tell the police who they believe the suspect was.
Soon, police have a firm ID. They believe the robber is this man, Christopher Askew.
So many people identified Christopher as the wrongdoer. So the police went to his mother's house and they knocked on the door and his mom answered and she said, "I know why you're here. I saw him on TV. he's up in Michigan.
They're greeted by his mother, who immediately assumes that they're there to collect her son because she too thought that the video looked like her son.
He ultimately got arrested in Michigan.
So for law enforcement, mom turning her son in sounds like they got the guy. I mean, you would think that a mother knows her own son or what he's capable of.
Police are convinced they have their guy.
Multiple witnesses and bank associates picked Askew out of a lineup and pointed him out as the suspect.
So at this point, this is an open and shut case. The bandit has been caught. He's been identified by witnesses at multiple locations, caught on CCTV footage, even turned in by his own mother.
Police charge Askew with the robberies. But just when they think this is a closed case, there's a game-changing development.
They get a call from a woman who claims that they got the wrong guy. She says, it's actually my boyfriend.
If she's right, it means police have a huge problem on their hands.
They arrested the wrong guy.
The real guy was probably kicked up on his couch, living easy with $15,000 in his pocket, thinking he got away with it.
And that isn't all. This case has a shocking twist.
Really spooked a lot of people out.
It's something you would see in a Hollywood movie.
The woman claims her boyfriend is the real bank robber, but that doesn't make any sense because her boyfriend looks nothing like the man police have in custody.
He's actually a white man.
The guy was this Conrad Zadaric. I think he had been in the country a couple of years. He's Eastern European.
When police go to Conrad's home, his girlfriend shows them exactly why she's so certain he is the right bank robber. He has a pile of cash that is covered in red ink, which comes from the dye packets that banks hide in money in case they get robbed.
One of the red dye packets exploded on him. He was using fingernail polish remover to try to get it off. Basically, they found all the evidence they needed.
But that's not all police find. They also recover the mask that Conrad used to disguise himself during the robberies.
Not just any mask, a $1,000 Hollywood mask of a black man.
A Hollywood-grade, full head covering latex mask that hid the fact that the suspect was not a black male, as the mask would indicate, but a skinny white guy.
It looked absolutely nothing like him. Wore sunglasses to cover up his blue eyes, put on gloves and some long sleeves and said, I'm gonna go rob a couple banks today.
He bought it, used it, committed these robberies. And I gotta tell you, this is something we've never seen before. And we handle a lot of cases, but I've never had a theatrical mask used during a series of robberies. And it was so lifelike.
The news anchor that covered this actually propped it up on the desk in the studio.
And we want to show you something. The prosecutor let us borrow this. This is the mask used in that crime. It has been sitting at my desk now for about a week, freaking everyone out.
This mask moved with the movements of the face and the head.
That behaves in such a way that it mimics flesh and muscle. So even when he talked, it looked like a real person.
Really spooked a lot of people out about how absolutely accurate and lifelike this mask looked. Christopher Askew, the initial suspect in this case, looked remarkably similar to what turned out to be a mask.
The story about the creepy mask quickly goes viral.
It's unbelievably lifelike. And the poor guy who just happened to look like it did nothing wrong. Absolutely nothing wrong.
But for all the effort Conrad put into getting the elaborate mask, he apparently didn't pay as much attention to his girlfriend.
He angers his girlfriend, who dimes him out to the police.
That's the one person he should have been nice to after he told her he committed all these robberies. I think she was probably mad at him, but she was more shaken that an innocent person was arrested. And good for her. Christopher was innocent of these robberies.
With the new evidence, witnesses from the banks realize they've been duped, and Christopher Askew is released.
We got Christopher out of jail, Our job is to seek justice, and it was unjust for Christopher to remain in jail a moment longer.
I'm sure when he got out, he felt vindicated, but if I were him, I think I'd be pretty upset with my mom.
Everybody thought it was him, mom included. But if you see the mask, you understand just how lifelike this thing is. It's like they used Christopher for the model for the mask. I mean, it looks just like him.
Since being wrongfully accused, Christopher has stayed out of the spotlight. The police say this case dramatically highlights why eyewitness accounts are not always right.
We've known for a long time that eyewitness testimony can be very, very shaky.
Those are still very valuable tools, witness accounts of what happened. The real lesson here, though, is that those things all by themselves are not as valuable as you may think.
Conrad is charged with 6 counts of robbery.
Once he was found in possession of the mask and they piled on his girlfriend's testimony, Conrad was pretty much done.
Pled guilty to these robbers and is serving a 25-year sentence in one of the Ohio penitentiaries. He's going to be close to 60 when he gets out of prison, but it's scary to think that someone could buy a theatrical mask, misidentify an innocent person.
To this day, police remain stunned by the case. And not just because of that mask.
I think the lesson in this case is don't piss off your girlfriend because she could turn you in on all the robberies.
If you're gonna buy a prosthetic mask, steal a couple $1,000s, maybe buy something nice for your girlfriend. Otherwise, she'll turn you in.
A few minutes before everything changed, Colleferro was just another small Italian town settling into a late summer night. The kind of night where the streets near the bars are filled with fragments of conversation. The glow of streetlights reflecting off car windows, and groups of young people drifting between venues with no clear plan except to stay out a little longer. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested tragedy. Nothing suggested that within minutes, a young man would be dead, and an entire country would eventually be forced to ask how something so fast, so sudden, and so violent could happen in what should have been an ordinary social setting. What happened to Willie Montero Duarte on the night of September 5th going into the early hours of September 6th, 2020, did not unfold like a prolonged confrontation or a carefully planned attack. According to the judicial reconstruction, it erupted quickly, almost abruptly, in the space between a minor street dispute and an irreversible act of group violence. Willie was 21 years old. He was not the origin of the conflict that night. He was not even supposed to be involved in it. He was there with friends, as many young people are, in a nightlife area where small tensions can flare up and disappear without consequence. But on this night, a minor argument between groups of young men escalated in a way that would pull him directly into its center. The initial dispute, as described in the investigation and later in court, began over something trivial, verbal exchanges, perceived disrespect, and the kind of ego-driven confrontation that often appears in nightlife environments where alcohol, pride, and group dynamics collide. One of Willie's friends became involved in this early altercation. It was not a large fight at first. It was fragmented, unstable, and still contained within the boundaries of what, in many cases, might have remained a fleeting disturbance. Willie's role at this stage was not aggression, but intervention. He stepped in to protect or separate his friend from the escalating tension. This detail would become central later, because it places him not as a participant in violence, but as someone attempting to interrupt it. At that moment, the situation was still fluid. It had not yet crystallized into the fatal encounter that would define the case. Then came the arrival of another group of young men, later identified in the judicial proceedings as Marco Bianchi, Gabriele Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia. These individuals were not unknown in the context of the investigation. The Bianchi brothers, in particular, were later described through court documentation as having a reputation for physical confrontation and involvement in previous disturbances. On that night, They entered the situation after the initial dispute had already begun to unfold. What matters in the reconstruction is not a long chain of motives or hidden planning, but the speed with which their presence transformed a local argument into something far more dangerous. According to the evidence presented, including witness accounts and video reconstruction, the turning point came when Willie was physically present in the space of the confrontation, attempting to intervene rather than escalate it. The judicial narrative consistently emphasizes one critical fact. Willie was not identified as the initiator of the conflict. He did not start the argument. He did not approach with intent to attack. He stepped into a situation already in motion, attempting to separate people rather than to strike them. But the situation did not stabilize. Instead, it intensified. The arrival of the group associated with the Bianchi brothers marked the transition from a verbal and chaotic altercation into a coordinated physical assault. The violence, as later described by the court, unfolded extremely quickly. There was no prolonged exchange of blows, no extended confrontation in which both sides engaged evenly. Instead, the reconstruction describes a sudden burst of force directed at Willie, beginning with a powerful kick delivered by Gabrielle Bianchi. That first impact destabilized him immediately. It broke the fragile balance he had in the middle of the situation and caused him to lose stability. Once he was no longer upright, the situation deteriorated within seconds. The group converged on him. Multiple individuals participated in the assault, striking with hands and feet in rapid succession. Witness descriptions and judicial summaries converge on a consistent image. Willie was overwhelmed. He did not have the opportunity to mount a defense or respond in any meaningful way. The violence was not a back-and-forth fight. It was a concentrated, collective attack. The duration, according to the case reconstruction, was extremely short, measured in roughly a little over a minute, yet within that compressed time frame. The consequences were catastrophic. The force of the blows, particularly directed at the upper body, resulted in severe internal trauma. The medical findings later confirmed injuries to vital organs, including the heart and lungs, caused by repeated and forceful impacts to the chest and back. The language used in forensic conclusions was stark. The trauma was severe, multiple, and incompatible with survival without immediate emergency intervention. In that moment, however, there was no immediate clarity about the extent of the internal damage. There was only the visible reality of a young man collapsing under repeated strikes, in a situation where, according to witnesses, he had no meaningful chance to defend himself. Once the assault stopped, the scene shifted abruptly from violence to aftermath. Willie was no longer actively involved in any confrontation. He was incapacitated. Emergency services were called, and the focus moved from the attackers to the victim. The same night that had begun with ordinary social interaction in a small-town nightlife area now became a race against time to save a life that was already critically compromised. Willie was transported for urgent medical care, but he did not survive the journey. He died en route to the hospital due to the severity of his internal injuries, specifically traumatic shock and damage to internal organs caused by blunt force trauma. In the immediate aftermath, there was no clear public understanding of what had happened. Only fragments existed, reports of a fight, a young man hospitalized, confusion about who had done what. But within those fragments, investigators began assembling a sequence that would later be confirmed through witness testimony, medical analysis, and legal reconstruction. What became increasingly clear was that this was not a prolonged conflict or mutual fight that escalated beyond control. It was a brief, intense burst of group violence directed at a single individual who had entered the situation without initiating it. The speed of the event is one of its most disturbing elements. There was no long build-up once the confrontation turned physical. There was no extended negotiation of violence. There was only a rapid escalation from presence to intervention to overwhelming force. And within that narrow window, the outcome became irreversible. The night in Colleferro did not end with the dispersal of a crowd or the quiet fading of an argument. It ended with the collapse of a 21-year-old man whose only role in the situation had been a step forward when others were already in conflict. And in that aftermath, before the investigation fully unfolded, before the courtroom would later reconstruct each movement and each responsibility, there was only shock, confusion, and the early realization that something had gone profoundly wrong in a matter of moments that no one on that street that night would ever be able to forget. A young man's life is often defined not by the ordinary rhythm of his days, but by the way others remember him when he is no longer there to speak for himself. In the case of Willie Montero Duarte, what remains in the record is not only the sequence of events that led to his death, but also the portrait of a 21-year-old whose presence, according to those who knew him, was marked by calmness, kindness, and a willingness to step into moments of tension not to escalate them, but to defuse them. He was born in Italy to a family of Cape Verdean origin, growing up in Colleferro, a small town not far from Rome. It was not a place that carried international attention or notoriety in itself, but like many suburban communities, it contained its own social rhythms, its own informal gathering points, and its own fragile balance between youthful leisure and occasional conflict. Willie worked in the food and hospitality sector, a job that placed him in daily contact with people, routine service, and the kind of interpersonal interactions that require patience and composure. Friends and family described him as someone sociable and approachable, a person who moved easily between groups without tension or hostility. There is no indication in the record that he was involved in criminal activity or that he was known for aggression. Instead, his presence in the story of September 5th and 6th, 2020, emerges almost accidentally, as though he had stepped into a narrative that was never meant to include him. That night, Colleferro's nightlife district, particularly around bars and public gathering spaces, was active in the way such areas often are on weekends. Clusters of young people moving between conversations, drinks, and social groups, with interactions that can shift quickly from friendly to confrontational. The initial conditions that would eventually lead to tragedy were not unusual in themselves. According to the judicial reconstruction, a minor disagreement broke out between groups of young men. The exact trigger is described in general terms rather than as a single defining act. Verbal exchanges, perceived disrespect, and the kind of fleeting interpersonal friction that can occur in crowded nightlife environments. At this early stage, the conflict was not yet a unified fight, but rather a fragmented situation, with individuals positioned in different parts of the space. Tension rising unevenly rather than explosively. One of Willie's friends became involved in this early exchange, placing Willie indirectly near the center of the unfolding situation. Importantly, the record does not identify Willie as the origin of the dispute. His role begins to appear only when he moves toward the conflict area in an attempt to intervene. This distinction is critical in understanding how rapidly the situation escalated beyond its initial scope. Willie's action, as described in witness accounts and later legal reconstruction, was not one of provocation, but of interruption. He stepped into a space already charged with tension, attempting to separate individuals or protect a friend who had become involved. In environments like this, such interventions can sometimes de-escalate conflict, or at least redirect it away from immediate violence. But on this occasion, the presence of another group shifted the trajectory entirely. The individuals later identified as Marco Bianchi, Gabriele Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia entered the situation after the initial dispute had already begun. Their arrival did not resolve the tension. Instead, it intensified it. The court record later placed particular emphasis on the role of the Bianchi brothers, who were described within the case context as individuals associated with prior episodes of physical confrontation and local notoriety for aggressive behavior. However, in the moment itself, what mattered was not reputation but proximity and reaction. The situation, already unstable, became more volatile as more participants converged into a single physical space. At this point, the distinction between a verbal altercation and physical violence began to collapse. The reconstruction indicates that Willie was not advancing toward confrontation, but was instead positioned in a mediating role when the attack began. This is a detail consistently reinforced across witness statements. He was not acting as an aggressor. The transition from tension to violence was abrupt. According to the legal findings, Gabrielle Bianchi delivered the first significant physical strike, a powerful kick aimed at Willie's upper body. The impact was decisive in changing the physical dynamics of the scene. Willie lost balance immediately, and in that moment of instability, the situation transformed from a chaotic argument into a coordinated group assault. Once he was on the ground or in a vulnerable position, multiple individuals joined in the attack. The violence was not described as a series of isolated exchanges, but rather as a concentrated burst of force directed at a single individual. Hands and feet were used repeatedly, and the attack unfolded in rapid succession, leaving no meaningful opportunity for defensive reaction. The judicial narrative emphasizes the speed of the event. It did not extend over a prolonged fight. It lasted approximately a little more than a minute, yet within that short span, the consequences were irreversible. What distinguishes this case is not duration but intensity. Witness descriptions and later court reasoning converge on the idea that Willie was overwhelmed. Almost immediately after the first decisive strike, there was no equilibrium in the confrontation, no mutual exchange of blows that would suggest a balanced fight. Instead, there was an asymmetry of force and numbers, with Willie placed in a position where defense was effectively impossible. As the assault continued, the focus of the violence remained concentrated on his upper body. This detail would later become significant in the medical analysis. The injuries sustained were not superficial or incidental. They were internal, severe, and ultimately fatal. The forensic findings described extensive trauma to vital organs, including the heart and lungs, consistent with repeated blunt force impacts to the chest and back. These injuries were not immediately visible in their full severity at the scene, but their effects were rapid and catastrophic. After the attack ceased, Willie was no longer an active participant in any interaction. He was incapacitated. The transition from violence to aftermath was abrupt. The same individuals who had been present during the assault now stood in a scene that had shifted beyond their control. Emergency response was initiated, and attention moved from confrontation to medical urgency. Willie was transported for emergency care, but the severity of internal injuries meant that survival was no longer possible. He died during transport to the hospital, the result of traumatic shock combined with organ damage caused by the blows he had sustained. In the absence of full public information at the time, the early understanding of the incident was fragmented. People nearby had seen parts of what happened, but not necessarily the complete sequence. The reconstruction of events would take time, relying on multiple forms of evidence: witness testimony, medical examination, and video analysis. What gradually emerged from this process was a consistent picture of escalation without proportionality, of a situation in which a minor social conflict had been transformed into a fatal group assault within a very short time frame. The details of Willie's life and the circumstances of his death began to form two parallel narratives. One grounded in his identity as a young man living an ordinary life in Colleferro, and the other defined by the sudden and violent interruption of that life in a public space. The contrast between these two realities would later become central to how the case was understood, not only in legal terms, but in public consciousness. A few minutes after the tension had begun to gather in the nightlife area of Colleferro, the situation had already shifted into a phase where events were no longer shaped by intention or dialogue, but by momentum. According to the judicial reconstruction, what unfolded on the night of 5 to 6 September 2020 was not a prolonged confrontation between two clearly defined sides, but rather a rapidly evolving sequence of interactions in which small disputes, group presence, and sudden physical actions converged into a single violent outcome. At the center of this sequence was Willie Montero Duarte, a 21-year-old who, until that moment, had not been part of any direct conflict. The initial spark, as established by investigators, began with a minor altercation between groups of young men in the area near local bars. The cause of this early dispute is consistently described in general terms rather than a single decisive incident. Verbal exchanges, perceived disrespect, and the kind of fragile social friction that can escalate in nightlife environments where groups form and reform quickly. One of Willie's friends became involved in this initial confrontation, placing Willie in proximity to the developing tension. It is important, according to the case record, that Willie's role at this stage was not one of aggression. He did not initiate violence. Instead, he moved into the situation in an attempt to intervene to separate individuals, or to protect his friend from escalation. This intervention, rather than resolving the situation, became the point at which the trajectory of the night changed irreversibly. The arrival of 4 individuals, Marco Bianchi, Gabriele Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia, marked the transition from a disorganized argument into a concentrated act of violence. These individuals entered the scene after the initial dispute had already begun, but their presence had a decisive effect on its escalation. The judicial proceedings later examined their role in detail, particularly focusing on the actions of the Bianchi brothers, who were described in the context of the case as having a history of physical confrontation and a reputation for aggressive behavior within their local environment. However, in the moment itself, what mattered was not their background, but their immediate engagement with the unfolding situation. The confrontation reached its critical point when physical violence was initiated against Willie. According to the court's reconstruction, Gabriele Bianchi delivered the first significant strike, a forceful kick directed at Willie's upper body. This moment is identified in the legal narrative as the decisive turning point, because it immediately altered Willie's physical state and removed any remaining balance from the situation. Once struck, Willie lost stability and was no longer able to maintain an upright defensive posture. In that instant, the dynamic of the encounter shifted from a chaotic group argument into a coordinated assault. Following this initial impact, the situation escalated rapidly. The remaining individuals joined in the attack, and the violence became collective. The reconstruction describes a sequence of blows delivered in quick succession, involving both punches and kicks, directed primarily at Willie's body. The court and witness accounts emphasize that the attack was extremely fast and overwhelmingly one-sided. There was no indication of an extended exchange of blows or any balanced physical confrontation. Instead, the violence unfolded as a concentrated burst directed at a single individual who was already destabilized. The duration of the attack, as established in the judicial findings, was very short, approximately just over 1 minute, but within that brief time frame, the consequences were severe and irreversible. Willie was overwhelmed almost immediately after the first strike, and the subsequent blows left him with no meaningful opportunity to defend himself or regain control of his position. The scene, as later reconstructed, reflects a pattern of collective aggression in which multiple participants acted simultaneously or in rapid sequence. intensifying the force directed at the victim. As the assault continued, the physical condition of Willie deteriorated rapidly. The focus of the attack, according to forensic analysis, involved repeated impacts to the upper body, particularly the chest and back. These areas would later be identified as the source of the most critical injuries. The violence did not cease gradually or through negotiation. It stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving Willie incapacitated on the ground. At that point, the confrontation effectively ended, and what remained was a shift from active violence to its immediate consequences. Emergency assistance was called, and attention turned to the condition of the victim. Willie was no longer responsive in a way that allowed for recovery through immediate intervention at the scene. He was transported for urgent medical care, but his condition was already critical. During transport to the hospital, he succumbed to his injuries. The cause of death, as later confirmed in medical findings, was traumatic shock combined with severe internal injuries to vital organs, including the heart and lungs, resulting from blunt force trauma sustained during the attack. The early moments following the incident were marked by fragmentation of information. Witnesses had seen portions of what occurred, but no single perspective captured the entire sequence in real time. This fragmentation contributed to initial uncertainty about the exact nature of the confrontation, the roles of those involved, and the speed at which it escalated. However, as investigators began to assemble evidence from multiple sources, including witness statements, medical examination, and video reconstruction, a consistent narrative emerged. That narrative did not describe a prolonged fight or a mutual exchange of violence. Instead, it described a brief but extreme episode of group assault directed at a single individual who had entered the situation in a non-aggressive capacity. The significance of this reconstruction lies not only in the identification of those involved, but in the clarity with which it illustrates the transformation of a minor social conflict into a fatal outcome within a very short span of time. The sequence of events, as established through the judicial process, shows how quickly group dynamics, physical proximity, and sudden aggression can converge, leaving no space for de-escalation once the critical threshold of violence has been crossed. After the attack in Colleferro, the scene did not immediately resolve into clarity. It resolved into fragments, confused witnesses, scattered accounts, and a rapidly developing medical emergency involving a young man whose condition was already critical by the time the violence stopped. The investigation into the death of Willie Montero Duarte did not begin with certainty, but with reconstruction, trying to understand, second by second, how a brief confrontation outside a nightlife area could escalate into a fatal group assault in such a short span of time. From the earliest stage of the inquiry, investigators focused on three core elements: medical evidence, witness testimony, and video surveillance from the area. Each of these would eventually converge into a consistent narrative, but initially they presented pieces that had to be carefully aligned. The medical examination provided the first definitive anchor. The forensic findings confirmed that Willie had suffered severe internal trauma, particularly to the chest area, with injuries affecting vital organs, including the heart and lungs. These injuries were consistent with repeated blunt force impacts rather than a single isolated blow. The conclusion was medically clear. The cause of death was traumatic shock combined with internal organ damage caused by violent physical assault. This medical foundation became essential in distinguishing the nature of the incident, not as a mutual fight, but as an overwhelming application of force against a single victim. At the same time, investigators began collecting witness statements from individuals present near the bars and public spaces of Colleferro that night. These accounts, while varying in detail, consistently described a rapid escalation of violence. Witnesses reported seeing a sudden burst of aggression rather than a prolonged confrontation. Willie was repeatedly described as being in a defensive or non-aggressive position, attempting to intervene rather than initiate conflict. Several witnesses emphasized the speed of the attack, noting that it unfolded so quickly that there was little time to react or fully understand what was happening before it ended. These testimonies, though independent, aligned in one critical aspect. The violence was one-sided and overwhelming. Parallel to witness accounts, investigators reviewed available video surveillance from the area. Although not every moment of the incident was captured in full detail, the footage that was recovered helped confirm the sequence of events. It showed the presence of multiple individuals converging in the same space during the critical time frame, and it supported the timeline established by witness testimony and medical analysis. Importantly, the visual evidence reinforced the conclusion that the confrontation escalated rapidly from a verbal or situational dispute into physical violence involving multiple participants acting against a single individual. As the investigation deepened, attention turned to identifying the individuals involved in the assault. Through a combination of witness identification, video analysis, and reconstruction of movements before and after the incident, 4 individuals were identified as central to the attack: Marco Bianchi, Gabriele Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia. The presence and actions of these individuals became the focus of the legal inquiry. In the early phase of questioning, the suspects presented a version of events that sought to minimize their direct involvement. Their statements suggested that their role was not that of active aggressors, but rather of individuals attempting to intervene or separate those involved in the confrontation. However, these claims quickly came under scrutiny when compared with the physical evidence, witness testimony, and medical findings. The inconsistencies between their statements and the reconstructed timeline became one of the key investigative challenges. The prosecution focused on the contrast between the defendant's accounts and the objective evidence, where the suspects described limited involvement. The evidence indicated coordinated participation in a collective assault, where they suggested intervention, witness accounts, and video analysis suggested escalation. This contradiction became central to the legal interpretation of the case. Another important element in the investigation was the classification of motive. The judicial system examined the nature of the initial conflict and the reasons behind the escalation. The term feudal motives was introduced in the legal context to describe violence arising from trivial or disproportionate causes, minor disputes, perceived disrespect, or social confrontation that escalates far beyond its original significance. In this case, the initial altercation was described as stemming from minor verbal exchanges and interpersonal tension, without any substantial underlying conflict. The transformation of such a minor dispute into a fatal group assault became a critical aspect of the prosecution's argument. As the investigation progressed, the legal narrative began to take shape around a central sequence: a minor social conflict, the intervention of Willie in a non-aggressive capacity, the arrival and involvement of multiple individuals, and the rapid escalation into a collective attack. Each layer of evidence reinforced the same conclusion, that the violence was not accidental, not mutual, and not defensive in nature, but instead a rapid convergence of group aggression directed at a single individual. One of the most significant aspects of the investigative phase was the reconstruction of timing. Establishing how quickly the events unfolded was essential to understanding the nature of the violence. The evidence indicated that the attack lasted only a very short period of time, approximately just over a minute. Yet within that narrow window, the sequence of actions was sufficient to cause fatal internal injuries. This temporal compression became a defining feature of the case. It demonstrated how quickly physical confrontation can escalate beyond the point of recovery. leaving almost no opportunity for intervention once the critical threshold of violence is crossed. As suspects were formally identified and charged, the legal classification of the crime shifted toward homicide with aggravating circumstances. These included the involvement of multiple perpetrators and the concept of senseless or disproportionate motive. The investigation had moved from uncertainty to structure, from scattered accounts to a coherent reconstruction supported by medical, testimonial, and visual evidence. What remained was the judicial process itself, where these findings would be examined, contested, and ultimately evaluated in court. The investigation phase of the case did not merely establish who was involved, but also clarified the nature of what had occurred. A rapid escalation of a minor confrontation into a fatal group assault, in which the victim had no meaningful role in initiating the violence and no realistic opportunity to defend himself once it began. By the time the case of Willie Montero Duarte reached the courtroom, the facts had already been shaped through months of investigation, medical analysis, and reconstructed timelines. What remained was not the discovery of what happened, but the legal interpretation of how it should be understood under criminal law, and how responsibility should be distributed among those identified as participants in the fatal events of the night of 5 to 6 September 2020 in Colleferro. The trial phase began in 2021, with the defendants formally charged with homicide under aggravating circumstances. The prosecution's case rested on a combination of witness testimony, forensic findings, and video evidence, all of which had already been assembled during the investigative phase. The central argument presented by the prosecution was that the violence inflicted upon Willie was not incidental, not defensive, and not the result of a mutual confrontation, but rather a collective assault triggered by a trivial dispute and executed with overwhelming force against a single individual who had not initiated the conflict. The courtroom examination revisited the same sequence of events that had been reconstructed earlier. A minor altercation between groups of young men in a nightlife area, Willie's intervention in an attempt to separate or protect a friend, and the sudden arrival of 4 individuals whose involvement transformed the situation into a fatal attack. The prosecution emphasized the speed of escalation, highlighting that the entire violent episode lasted only a little over a minute, yet resulted in irreversible internal injuries and death. Medical evidence played a crucial role in the trial. The forensic report detailed severe trauma to the chest and upper body, with injuries to the heart and lungs consistent with repeated blunt force impacts. The medical experts testified that the nature of the injuries indicated high-intensity force applied, multiple times within a very short period. This evidence supported the conclusion that Willie had been subjected to sustained physical violence, while in a defenseless or severely disadvantaged position. The defense, representing the accused individuals, challenged aspects of the prosecution's interpretation, particularly regarding intent and the nature of participation. In their initial statements, the defendants had suggested that their involvement was limited or that they were attempting to intervene rather than escalate the situation. However, these claims were weighed against witness testimony and video reconstruction, which presented a different picture, one of coordinated participation in a group assault rather than isolated or defensive actions. The court examined these inconsistencies closely, comparing early statements with later evidence and evaluating the credibility of each account. As the trial progressed, the roles of the individual defendants were analyzed separately, but within the context of a single continuous event. Marco Bianchi and Gabrielle Bianchi, in particular, were placed under scrutiny due to their central positioning in the initial phase of the physical confrontation. The court reviewed the sequence in which the first decisive strike occurred, identified as a forceful kick that destabilized Willie and initiated the collapse of any physical balance he had in the confrontation. From that moment onward, the legal interpretation treated the attack as a collective action, in which multiple participants contributed to the continuation of violence against a single victim. The prosecution emphasized the concept of feudal motives, a legal classification used in Italian criminal law to describe violence arising from trivial or disproportionate causes. In this case, the initial conflict was described as stemming from minor verbal exchanges and social friction without substantive justification. The transformation of such a minor dispute into a fatal group assault was presented as a key element of aggravation, highlighting the disproportion between cause and consequence. Throughout the proceedings, the court also examined the broader context of group dynamics and escalation. While the legal focus remained on individual responsibility, the factual narrative consistently returned to the collective nature of the violence. The attack was not characterized as a prolonged fight between evenly matched parties, but as a rapid convergence of force directed at a single individual who had entered the situation in a non-aggressive capacity. This distinction was central to the court's reasoning. The judgment phase, delivered in 2023 following the appeal process, confirmed convictions while adjusting sentencing in some cases. The final outcomes resulted in significant prison sentences for all 4 defendants, with the Bianchi brothers receiving approximately 24 years each, and the other 2 defendants receiving sentences ranging between 21 and 23 years. The court's reasoning reaffirmed the characterization of the event as a sudden, collective act of violence driven by trivial motives and executed with disproportionate force. The appeal proceedings also revisited aspects of sentencing, leading to partial reductions compared to earlier rulings, but without altering the fundamental legal conclusion regarding guilt. The judiciary maintained that the essential structure of the crime remained unchanged, a minor confrontation escalating into a fatal group assault, resulting in the death of a 21-year-old who had not initiated the violence. Within the courtroom, the case was not only about assigning punishment, but also about defining legal and moral boundaries between conflict and collective aggression. The judgment reflected a clear distinction between spontaneous intervention and coordinated violence, between participation in a dispute and participation in an assault. As the sentences were delivered, the legal process formally closed one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in Italy in recent years. Yet even within the courtroom, the case carried an emotional weight that extended beyond procedural conclusions. The facts had been established, the responsibilities assigned, and the penalties imposed. But the underlying question of how such a rapid and disproportionate escalation could occur remained embedded in the narrative of the case itself. The trial phase, therefore, did not merely conclude with verdicts and sentences. It solidified a factual account in which a brief moment of violence had been transformed into a legally defined act of homicide with aggravating circumstances, rooted in collective action and senseless motive, and resulting in irreversible loss. In the aftermath of the trial, what remained in Colleferro was not the legal structure of the case, nor the formal language of judgments and sentencing, but the human impact of what had occurred in a matter of seconds on a September night. The death of Willie Montero Duarte did not remain confined to court records or investigative summaries. It expanded outward into public consciousness, into streets, schools, public squares, and national conversations about violence, youth behavior, and the fragile boundary between conflict and catastrophe. In the town where it happened, the reaction was immediate and deeply emotional. Colleferro, a place that had previously been defined by its quiet, suburban rhythm, became the focal point of mourning and reflection. Vigils were organized in memory of Willie, drawing large numbers of people who came not only to grieve, but to express disbelief at the nature of his death. The image that emerged in public discourse was consistent and difficult to reconcile. A 21-year-old who had not initiated the conflict, who had stepped into a situation in an attempt to intervene, and who had lost his life in a rapid and disproportionate burst of group violence. Across Italy, the case became a symbol, not of a single act alone, but of broader concerns about youth violence and the escalation of minor disputes into irreversible outcomes. Public reaction was marked by a sense of collective shock, particularly because the violence did not arise from an extended conflict or long-standing rivalry, but from what was legally described as a trivial and fleeting dispute. This aspect of the case, its lack of substantive origin, became one of the central points of reflection in media coverage and public discussion. Willie's identity as a young man working in the hospitality sector, known by those around him as sociable and peaceful, further deepened the emotional response. The contrast between his personal profile and the circumstances of his death contributed to the perception of profound injustice, not in a legal argumentative sense, but in a social and moral one. Memorials and public gatherings held in his honor were not only expressions of grief, but also collective statements against the kind of violence that had taken his life. In these moments, Willie became more than an individual victim of a criminal case. He became a reference point in discussions about how quickly social tensions can escalate when group dynamics override individual restraint. The case also triggered broader debates within Italian society regarding the nature of violence among young people, particularly in urban and suburban nightlife environments. Questions emerged about how minor confrontations could escalate so rapidly, and how group identity and collective behavior can amplify aggression beyond the intentions of any single participant. While the legal process had already defined the incident in terms of responsibility and sentencing, the social interpretation extended further, examining the conditions under which such events become possible in the first place. Educators, community leaders, and policymakers referenced the case in discussions about prevention, focusing on the importance of early intervention in conflicts and the need to distinguish between mediation and escalation in social disputes. Within this broader reflection, Willie's actions on the night of the incident were often highlighted in public discourse as an attempt to intervene rather than to provoke. This detail, consistently established in the judicial reconstruction, became central to the way the case was understood outside the courtroom. It reinforced the perception that his presence in the conflict was not as a participant in violence, but as someone attempting to interrupt it. The finality of the legal outcome did not diminish the emotional resonance of the case. Even after convictions were confirmed and sentences were issued, the narrative continued to circulate in media and public conversation as an example of how quickly ordinary social interactions can transform into fatal outcomes when violence escalates beyond control. The sentences imposed on the defendants, while representing the conclusion of the judicial process, did not resolve the broader questions raised by the case. Instead, they marked the formal end of legal responsibility while leaving intact the social and moral reflection that followed. In Colleferro and beyond, Willie's name became associated with campaigns and discussions aimed at preventing similar tragedies. His story was invoked in efforts to address youth violence, not as an abstract statistic, but as a concrete example of how a brief moment of aggression can permanently alter multiple lives. The emphasis in these reflections often returned to the speed of the event itself, the fact that within roughly a minute, a situation that began as a minor dispute escalated into a fatal assault. This temporal compression became a key element in understanding the case, underscoring how little time can exist between conflict and irreversible consequence. Ultimately, the aftermath of the case is defined by a tension between legal closure and social continuation. The courts determined responsibility, established the facts, and imposed sentences. But the broader meaning of what happened to Willie Montero Duarte continued to evolve outside the courtroom, in public memory and collective awareness. His death became a point of reference in conversations about violence, intervention, and the unpredictable dynamics of group conflict. And within that ongoing reflection, the central reality remains unchanged. A young man who stepped into a conflict he did not start in an attempt to intervene, and who never left the scene alive. The case of Willie Montero Duarte does not end neatly with a verdict or even with the public reaction that followed it. Like many cases defined by sudden, collective violence, it leaves behind a set of questions that extend beyond the courtroom and into the social conditions that made such an event possible in the first place. When a legal process concluded, what remained was not uncertainty about what had happened. The investigation, testimony, and forensic evidence had already established a coherent factual sequence, but rather an ongoing reflection on how such a rapid escalation of violence could occur in an ordinary social setting, among young people in a matter of seconds. One of the most enduring aspects of this case is the extreme compression of time between the initial dispute and the fatal outcome. The judicial reconstruction consistently described a sequence lasting just over a minute. Yet within that brief interval, a minor social conflict transformed into a lethal group assault. This temporal density is central to understanding why the case continues to resonate. It challenges the intuitive assumption that serious violence develops gradually or predictably. Instead, it demonstrates how quickly group dynamics, physical proximity, and impulsive aggression can converge into irreversible consequences. Another key element is the role of intervention and misinterpretation of intent. Willie's presence in the conflict was repeatedly defined in the judicial findings as non-aggressive. He did not initiate the dispute, nor was he identified as a central participant in its early stages. His decision to step into the situation was interpreted as an attempt to separate individuals or protect a friend. Yet in the escalation that followed, this intervention coincided with the arrival of additional individuals who interpreted or engaged with the situation in a way that led to immediate physical violence. The legal record emphasizes this shift, from verbal or situational tension to physical aggression directed at a single person. The case also highlights the dynamics of group violence, where individual responsibility becomes intertwined with collective action. The court identified four main defendants: Marco Bianchi, Gabrielle Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia, whose actions were evaluated not in isolation, but as part of a continuous sequence of coordinated violence. Within this framework, the distinction between individual strikes becomes less important than the overall structure of the assault. The legal reasoning focused on the fact that the attack was not a series of disconnected incidents, but a unified episode in which multiple participants contributed to a single outcome. The concept of feudal motives applied during sentencing further shaped the legal interpretation of the case. This classification refers to violence triggered by trivial or disproportionate causes, where the original conflict lacks substantive weight compared to the severity of the outcome. In this case, the initial dispute was described as arising from minor verbal exchanges and social friction, with no underlying serious conflict. The transformation of such a minor trigger into a fatal assault became one of the central aggravating elements in the court's reasoning. The sentencing itself, confirmed after appeal proceedings, reflected both the seriousness of the act and the legal distinctions made between the defendants. The Bianchi brothers received approximately 24 years of imprisonment, while the other two defendants received sentences ranging from 21 to 23 years. These outcomes were based on the court's evaluation of participation, responsibility, and the nature of involvement in the collective assault. While the appeal process adjusted certain aspects of sentencing, It did not alter the core finding of guilt or the fundamental characterization of the event as a group homicide with aggravating circumstances. Beyond the legal framework, the case continues to be examined in broader discussions about youth violence and social behavior in public spaces. It is frequently referenced as an example of how quickly minor disputes can escalate when group identity, physical confrontation, and impulsive reaction intersect. Importantly, these discussions do not redefine the legal facts of the case, but rather attempt to understand the conditions under which such a sequence of events becomes possible. The enduring significance of the case lies in this duality. A clearly established legal narrative on one hand, and an unresolved social reflection on the other. The facts of what happened to Willie Montero Duarte are not in dispute within the judicial record. What remains open is the broader interpretation of how a brief moment of conflict in a public space could result in the loss of a young life in such a rapid and irreversible way. In that sense, the case continues to function not only as a concluded criminal proceeding, but also as a reference point in discussions about violence, intervention, and the fragile threshold between everyday conflict and irreversible harm. When reflecting on the case of Willie Montero Duarte beyond the courtroom judgments, what emerges is not a mystery about facts, but a deeper confrontation with meaning, responsibility, and the fragile structure of everyday social life. The essential facts of the case are firmly established within the judicial record. A 21-year-old man, not involved in the origin of a dispute, stepped into a developing confrontation in Colleferro on the night of 5 to 6 September 2020, attempted to intervene, and was subsequently subjected to a rapid, collective assault by 4 individuals identified as Marco Bianchi, Gabriele Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia. The attack lasted only a short period of time, approximately just over a minute, but resulted in fatal internal injuries caused by repeated blunt force trauma to the chest and upper body. He died during transport to the hospital due to traumatic shock and organ damage. These facts are not in dispute within the legal framework of the case, and they form the basis of convictions and sentencing delivered through trial and appeal proceedings. Yet the significance of the case extends beyond this established sequence. One of the most important aspects of reflection concerns the speed at which violence escalated. The transformation from a minor social altercation into a fatal group assault occurred in a time frame so short that it challenges common assumptions about how conflict develops. In many narratives of violent crime, there is an expectation of escalation over time, a progression from argument to physical confrontation, or a buildup of tension that gradually reaches a breaking point. In this case, however, the judicial reconstruction describes a near-immediate transition from situational tension to coordinated physical violence. This compression of time is not merely a detail. It is central to understanding the nature of the event. It demonstrates how quickly group dynamics can override individual restraint, and how rapidly a situation can move beyond the possibility of verbal de-escalation once physical force is introduced. Another key element in the interpretation of the case is the role of intervention. Willie's involvement in the situation was consistently characterized in legal findings as non aggressive. He was not identified as the initiator of the dispute, nor as a central participant in its early stages. His presence in the conflict zone was linked to an attempt to intervene, likely to separate individuals or protect a friend involved in the initial argument. This distinction is crucial because it highlights the fragile boundary between intervention and vulnerability. In environments where tensions are already elevated, the act of stepping in can be interpreted in multiple ways depending on perception, group alignment, and momentary judgment. In this case, that intervention coincided with the arrival and involvement of individuals whose response was immediate physical violence. resulting in a fatal outcome. The legal classification of the event also plays an important role in its broader interpretation. The court applied the concept of feudal motives, a legal term used to describe violent acts arising from trivial or disproportionate causes. In this case, the initial dispute was described as minor, involving verbal exchanges and social friction without substantive underlying conflict. The disproportion between cause and consequence became one of the defining legal characteristics of the case. The transformation of a minor disagreement into a fatal assault is central to both the judicial reasoning and the public understanding of why the case holds such symbolic weight. The group nature of the violence further complicates its interpretation. The court identified 4 individuals whose actions collectively constituted the assault, while each defendant's role was evaluated individually for sentencing purposes. The broader legal narrative treated the attack as a unified event. This reflects an important aspect of group violence. Responsibility does not always manifest as isolated acts, but can emerge through coordinated or overlapping participation in a single continuous sequence. In such situations, the distinction between individual intent and collective outcome becomes a central legal and moral question. The sentencing outcomes, confirmed after appeal, reinforced the seriousness with which the judicial system treated the case. The Bianchi brothers received sentences of approximately 24 years, while the other 2 defendants received sentences between 21 and 23 years. These penalties reflected the court's assessment of participation, aggravating circumstances, and the nature of the violence involved. While the appeal process adjusted certain aspects of sentencing, it did not alter the fundamental conclusion of guilt or the classification of the crime as homicide with aggravating factors. Beyond legal conclusions, the case continues to function as a point of reference in broader discussions about violence in public spaces, particularly among young people. It is frequently cited in discussions about how quickly disputes can escalate when group identity, physical presence, and impulsive reaction intersect. However, these discussions operate in a different domain from the legal record. They do not change the established facts, but rather attempt to interpret their implications for prevention, awareness, and social behavior. Ultimately, the enduring significance of the case lies in this dual structure: a clear and documented legal reality on one side, and an ongoing social reflection on the other. The death of Willie Montero Duarte is not a case defined by uncertainty in facts, but by the clarity of its reconstruction and the difficulty of fully comprehending how such a brief moment of violence could produce irreversible consequences. In that sense, the case continues to stand not only as a concluded judicial matter, but as a lasting reminder of how quickly ordinary interactions can fracture into irreversible outcomes when violence is introduced into a fragile social moment. A final reflection on the case of Willie Montero Duarte requires moving beyond the courtroom, conclusions, and examining the deeper social meaning that has continued to surround the events of the night in Colleferro. The facts themselves are firmly established within the judicial record. A minor confrontation between groups of young men escalated in a nightlife area on 5 to 6 September 2020. Willie intervened in an attempt to separate or protect a friend, and within a very short time frame, approximately just over a minute, he was subjected to a collective physical assault by 4 individuals identified as Marco Bianchi, Gabriele Bianchi, Mario Pincarelli, and Francesco Bellegia. The violence was sudden, intense, and one-sided, resulting in severe internal injuries and ultimately his death during transport to the hospital. Legally, the case was resolved through convictions for homicide with aggravating circumstances, including the recognition of feudal motives and group participation. However, what remains significant is how this case has been interpreted in the broader social imagination. where it has become more than a criminal proceeding and instead a reference point for discussions about violence, responsibility, and prevention. One of the most persistent themes in public reflection is the question of disproportion. The case is often cited not because it involved a complex or prolonged conflict, but because of the extreme imbalance between cause and consequence. A minor social dispute, described in the judicial record as involving verbal exchanges and trivial friction, escalated into a fatal assault. This disproportion challenges common assumptions about how violence develops, particularly the belief that severe outcomes are typically preceded by extended escalation. Instead, this case demonstrates how quickly group dynamics can transform a fleeting confrontation into irreversible harm. Another key point of reflection is the role of intervention. Willie's involvement in the situation was consistently described in legal findings as non-aggressive. He was not identified as the origin of the dispute, nor as an active participant in its escalation. His presence in the conflict zone was linked to an attempt to intervene, likely to separate individuals involved in the initial argument. In public interpretation, this detail has taken on symbolic weight, representing the vulnerability of individuals who step into volatile situations with peaceful intent. The case illustrates how the meaning of an action, such as intervention, can be overwhelmed by the dynamics of group aggression, where rapid perception and reaction determine outcomes more than intention. The collective nature of the violence is another central aspect of its interpretation. The court established that 4 individuals participated in the assault, and while their specific actions were evaluated individually for sentencing, the event itself was treated as a single continuous episode of group violence. This distinction is important because it highlights how responsibility in such cases is not always linear or isolated. Instead, it emerges from overlapping actions within a short time frame, where the combined effect of multiple participants produces a result that exceeds any single contribution. In this sense, the case has been widely discussed as an example of how group behavior can amplify aggression beyond individual thresholds. The legal concept of feudal motives also plays a significant role in how the case is understood. By classifying the violence as arising from trivial or disproportionate causes, the court emphasized the lack of meaningful justification for the escalation. This classification is not merely technical. It shapes the moral framing of the case by underscoring the gap between the initial dispute and the severity of the outcome. It reinforces the idea that the violence was not rooted in necessity or defense, but in a rapid loss of restraint triggered by minor social friction. Sentencing outcomes confirmed this interpretation within the legal system. The Bianchi brothers received approximately 24 years of imprisonment each, while the other defendants received sentences ranging between 21 and 23 years. These penalties reflected the court's assessment of participation, responsibility, and aggravating circumstances, including the collective nature of the attack and its senseless origin. Although appeals adjusted certain aspects of sentencing, the fundamental legal conclusions remained unchanged. The event constituted a homicide with aggravating factors arising from group violence and trivial motive. Beyond legal resolution, the case continues to function as a point of reference in discussions about violence in public and social spaces. It is frequently cited in educational and civic contexts as an example of how quickly conflict can escalate when group identity, physical proximity, and impulsive reaction intersect. However, these discussions operate outside the judicial framework and serve primarily to interpret the conditions that allow such incidents to occur. The established facts of the case remain unchanged, but their implications are continuously examined in relation to broader questions of prevention and social behavior. Ultimately, the enduring significance of the case lies in this duality between legal closure and social reflection. The judicial process has provided a clear and definitive account of responsibility and consequence. While public discourse continues to grapple with the underlying fragility revealed by the event, the death of Willie Montero Duarte stands as a documented case of rapid, collective violence triggered by a minor dispute. But it also persists as a reminder of how quickly ordinary interactions can collapse into irreversible outcomes when aggression overrides restraint.